Today, if you venture south of the Temple Mount, you will find ancient stones that remind us of a person that became a personification of the devil himself. And what is astonishing are the prophecies that describe this man in great detail, hundreds of years before he was even born. According to the book of Daniel, this man committed great evil against the Jewish people, and he is a type of an even greater evil that will rise in the future. To learn more, I invite you to our next episode on the history of Jerusalem. At the same time, do not forget to subscribe to my channel to receive notifications about the new episodes. So let us begin our journey in time. In our last episode, we talked about the rebuilding of Jerusalem under Ezra and Nehemiah. If you have not seen that episode, I highly recommend that you do. I will put the link below in the description. And so the Jewish people went back to the land, rebuilt the temple and Jerusalem. Still, the province of Judah was a small and insignificant political land subjected to the Persian Empire. And even though many Jews did return from exile to Israel, many remained in the foreign land. Yet far from the land of their forefathers, the Jews continued to create literature that influenced future generations. It seems that the most remarkable book written in exile is the book of Daniel. No other book in the Bible provides so much information on future events. The book of Daniel precisely describes many world empires, their development, their fall, and most importantly, Daniel records the culmination of world's history, where God will establish an everlasting kingdom where the Messiah will rule forever. The things that Daniel sees and records are so dramatic that sometimes the prophet is totally exhausted and troubled by the vision he receives from God. In chapter 8 of the book of Daniel, the prophet is given insight into events that will happen in less than 400 years after Daniel's lifetime. The persecutions of the madman named Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who committed great evil and abominations in the 2nd century BC. Before we focus on Antiochus, I would like to talk about the context of Daniel prophecies that are not only important to the Jewish people, but the entire world. Daniel lives through two great empires. First, as a young boy, he is taken captive to Babylon, where he experienced its greatness and collapse. Second, he saw how Persia defeated mighty Babylonian Empire. But Daniel was also chosen by God to see events long after his death in the form of dreams and visions. In those visions, symbolically, world empires are represented by different things. What is astonishing is that the symbols used are very accurate in describing the nature of each kingdom and the historical events that happen around them. If you believe that the book of Daniel was truly written by the prophet, then this book is the most spectacular piece of prophecy in human history. Literal critics dismiss that the book was written in Babylon because if that was true, they would have to accept that it is a true miracle. Daniel's timeline begins with the Babylonian Empire represented by a golden head on a statue or a lion with wings. It is followed by Persia, represented by a chest and arms of silver or a bear. The third empire revealed to Daniel is Greece, represented by a belly and thighs of bronze, or a leopard with 4 wings. The last world empire mentioned is Rome, characterized by legs of iron and feet of mixed iron and clay, or an unspecified beast with 10 horns. All the empires are midgets compared to the final empire that has a divine nature. This empire comes like a meteor from heaven, crushes the world's empires, grows like a vast mountain, fills the whole earth, and is ruled by the Ancient of Days and a Son of Man coming in clouds. This, of course, is a very brief description of the visions in chapters 2 and 7 of the book of Daniel. Perhaps I will do a more detailed presentation on those visions in the future, but for now, I just wanted to give you a general understanding of the visions and their relation to the world empires. It is essential to understand the context, because chapters 2 and 7 go as far as the culmination of world's history, where God will restore His kingdom on earth. But Daniel also received prophecies directly corresponding to the events of our today's episode. In chapter 8, Daniel gets another vision, a vision of the ram, the goat, and the horn. In this vision, explained to Daniel by angel Gabriel, we learn that the ram represents the Persian Empire. According to Marcellinus from the 4th century AD, the Persian ruler would carry a gold head of a ram when he marched before his army. The ram has 2 horns in the vision. One horn was larger and developed later than the other. The horns would correspond to the fact that Persia consisted of Media and Persia. Persia developed later, joined with Media to create a single empire, and eventually became prominent. Later in the vision, we read that the goat charges the ram with a prominent horn between his eyes. Again, the angel Gabriel in verse 21 explains that the goat should be identified as the future Greek Empire. The prominent horn can be understood as representing Alexander the Great, who started his campaign against Persia in 334 BC. We read that the goat will come from the west, which corresponds nicely with the position of Greece to Persia. The goat charges the ram with a great rage, which symbolizes the anger of Greeks who never forgot the destruction Persia made to Athens by Darius I and his son Xerxes I. We read that the prominent horn was broken off at the height of his power. This, of course, is a reference to Alexander the Great, who after carving out an empire of 1.5 million square miles died from fever in 323 BC at the age of 32. Alexander left 2 sons, but they were quickly murdered, and the empire was split into 4 parts, just as the prophecy foretells, speaking of the 4 horns. Out of one of the 4 horns grew a little horn that started small but became very large and powerful. Scholars agree that this little horn represents the 8th ruler of the Seleucid Greek Empire, Antiochus IV Epiphanes. We read that this little horn will become a great enemy of the Jewish people.
And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south, and toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. And it waxed great even to the host of heaven. And it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And an host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered.
Those few verses are a remarkable description of what Antiochus IV Epiphanes did in Jerusalem and to the Jewish people. Antiochus gained his position through bribery and flattery. He made notable conquests in the south, Egypt, the east, Persia, Parthia, Armenia, and the beautiful land, meaning Judah. His persecution of the Jewish people started after Antiochus was humiliated in Egypt by Rome. In 168 BC, Antiochus led an attack on Egypt and also sent a fleet to capture Cyprus. Before he reached Alexandria, his path was blocked by a single elderly Roman ambassador named Gaius Pompilius Livius, who delivered a message from the Roman Senate directing Antiochus to withdraw his armies from Egypt and Cyprus, or consider himself in a state of war with the Roman Republic. Antiochus said he would discuss it with his council, whereupon the Roman envoy drew a line in the sand around Antiochus and said, "Before you leave this circle, give me a reply that I can take back to the Roman Senate." This implied Rome would declare war if the king stepped out of the cycle without committing to leave Egypt immediately. Weighing his options, Antiochus decided to withdraw. Only then the Pompilius agreed to shake hands with Antiochus. The furious Syrian king returned to Judah and poured out his anger at the Jewish people, who did not want to undergo Hellenization. In the book of Maccabees, we read that Antiochus plundered the temple in Jerusalem and committed deeds of murder. We read 80,000 men, women, boys, girls, and even infants were murdered by Antiochus' soldiers that attacked Jerusalem. In December 167 BC, Antiochus committed his crowning act of blasphemy against the Jewish religion by erecting an altar to Zeus in the temple and sacrificed a swine on it. Antiochus went so far as to claim that he is God and insisted that the Jews refrain from following the Jewish religious laws, like diet, circumcision, Shabbats, and feasts. He made war with Jewish people and their God. Eventually, the Jewish people did rebel and reconquered Jerusalem from the evil ruler. The temple was cleansed, and the dark days were temporarily over. Today, Jewish people celebrate this victory through the holiday of Hanukkah. We will discuss those events in my next episode. But according to Daniel, the events that happened in the 2nd century BC are only a prelude to the great confrontation between evil and good. It is true that Antiochus did satisfy some of the prophecies, but some still remain not fulfilled. The predictions in Daniel 11 from verses 36 to 45 speak that the king will do as he pleases, He will exalt and magnify himself above every god, and he will say unheard of things against the God of gods. According to Daniel, Antiochus is just a type, a foreshadowing of a future enemy that will persecute the Jewish people. This mysterious person is much more than an evil human ruler, but a personification of the master of all evil, the devil. This future figure is sometimes called the anti-Messiah, or as Christians call him, the Antichrist. This diabolical person will do similar things that Antiochus did, but on a much grander scale. The books of the New Testament provide us with much more information about this future enemy of God. Antiochus, because he was a pagan ruler, commanded the Jews to worship a pagan god. The future world ruler will also install a statue in the temple, which will even talk according to the book of Revelation. This statue will not represent a foreign pagan god, but it will be the statue that will represent Satan himself. In the book of 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 3 and 4, the Antichrist is called a man of lawlessness, who will rule on earth and will proclaim himself God. He will oppose and will exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. Paul writes that this will happen when many are saying peace and safety, 1 Thessalonians 5:3, of which we read in Daniel 9:26. This will be the time many refer to as the tribulation period, the last hour days in which the Antichrist will come, 1 John 2:18. This person will be Satan's masterpiece, his King of Kings and Lord of Lords, his evil substitute for the Jewish Messiah himself, Revelation 13:2. First, he will dominate the world and make a covenant with Israel, and then he will break it in the middle of the 7 years, bringing an end to sacrifice and offering. The length of the second half of the world's ruler reign is made clear by Revelation 13:5, which states explicitly that his rule will be extended for 42 months. So this world ruler will first conquer the world, Daniel 7:23, and he will fight with the saints who will be defeated. He was given power to make war against the saints and to conquer them, and he was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation, Revelation 13:7. So this will be a time of great suffering for those that become believers. Revelation 13:16-17 states that the world ruler will require everyone to receive the mark of the beast to buy or sell. To obtain such a mark, the people would have to recognize Antichrist as God and Satan's supreme deity. Thousands will refuse to do this, and according to Revelation 20:4 and 6, they will be beheaded. There is no doubt that with today's technology, such a system could be established. The world is capable of storing data on very powerful computers. This is why this prophecy about the mark of the beast was questioned in the past, since many did not suspect that electronic hardware and software will evolve in such a rapid way. Today, we have credit cards that allow people to buy. Also, traveling and transferring data is not a problem anymore, making a good background for the future world government. The option with some electronic chip that would be installed to the forehead or arm on a person could make much sense, because a credit card can always be lost. Then this process of inserting such an electronic device might require some surgery, leaving a mark. However, true believers will not get the mark of the beast, because only those who honor the Antichrist as God will get it. Because the world dictator will blaspheme against God and break his covenant with Israel, persecuting them, God will judge the earth. The day of the Lord will be a time of darkness, as the prophet Amos foretold, Amos 5:18. Paul writes that it will come rapidly as a thief at night, 1 Thessalonians 5:2. It will be a time when God will lay out his wrath on the sinful humanity. A survey of all those chapters reveals there will be war, famine, pestilence, demon possession, earthquakes, and disturbance of ordinary course of nature. The result of all those events will be that most of the world population will be destroyed. All of the tragic events are initiated when in the future the true little horn will commit the abomination that causes desolation. The abomination that causes desolation will be a sign to flee from the city, as recorded in Daniel 11:31 and 12:11. Yeshua refers to this time as great suffering and trouble. For then there will be a great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. The Gospel of Matthew 24:21. This conflict between good and evil, God and Satan, is described in Revelation 13 and 14. Chapter 13 describes the darkest period of human existence. In chapter 14, John is given a vision of Christ's victorious triumph over evil as he begins his judgment to destroy Satan's rule over the earth. Chapter 14 speaks about the future that will happen in Revelation 19, when Antichrist's rule will end at the second coming of the Lord, that Daniel calls the end of desolation. Daniel 9:27. But let's go back to Antiochus IV Epiphanes and talk about his mark on Jerusalem. Antiochus also made significant changes to Jerusalem's architecture. Understanding that Jewish people are rebellious, he constructed a massive fortress with 2 towers overlooking the temple. This fortress is known as Acra. The available sources indicate that Acra stood south of the temple. Benjamin's Mazar excavations of the Ophel, the area adjoining the southern portion of the platform, have uncovered the foundations of a massive structure and a large cistern, both possibly dating to the Hellenistic period. These have been tentatively identified as remains of Acra, with the structure featuring rows of small interconnected rooms believed to be the remains of the barracks. These have been demolished and built over during the Hasmonean period, matching the description in Josephus. Therefore, Acra was a fortress, had a large water reservoir, and also consisted of a walled living compound, sometimes called the Second Antiochia. To give you an understanding how it would look, I leave you with a 3D model showing where Accra would stand in correspondence to the temple. As always, I encourage you to comment. You can also subscribe to this channel to stay informed about the next monthly episodes on Jerusalem's history. You can also support me by clicking on the Join button on my channel main page. This will certainly help me to improve and create more presentations. Have a great day and see you soon!